But I have a specific question. In this bill that I'm looking at, it says there, in the case of a mother who becomes pregnant as a result of rape or incest, the biological father, in addition to the duties imposed by subsection A, also is responsible for the full cost of any expenses incurred by the mother for mental health counseling arising out of the rape or incest. Does that, as an attorney and as a father and as a citizen, does that give you some concerns? Of course, nobody wants to let anyone go scot-free, but I assume that in subsection A, the person is going to be prosecuted. And this is one of the things we talked about a lot in our subcommittee meetings. What is your position regarding that? Well, if the father is being prosecuted, and I assume he would be going to prison, and if the person who's going to be responsible to pay the cost for mental health and care for the victim, how is that going to work?
The legislation would require that in that situation that you've identified, that the criminal,
right,
who commits an act of sexual assault or, well, that's sexual assault too, but rape or incest.
Criminal sexual conduct of any kind.
Of any kind. That's an important change here as well. It was a big problem that we had before because it wasn't defined. But it would provide that that person, in addition to facing criminal penalties, would be required to pay for those costs that you've outlined. That's right.
But see, that's what's confusing, because if you go back to subsection A in the same bill, it's like they didn't think it through, because you and I both know for a criminal sexual conduct of a rape, you're talking 20 years plus in jail. And then subsection A says that no costs from the state of South Carolina should be used for any expenses that result from an abortion. So, hear me out. You've got a minor child that's been raped. I've not ever seen one where there's rape or incest and a resulting abortion that might occur, and you're saying that the state is not going to pay to help that child, but that child has to wait to get coverage for mental health counseling or any effects of this abortion until we finish prosecuting and get that guy out of jail. See, it doesn't seem like it's been thought through. Well, in the practical purposes of Section 4, and I'd ask the body to look at this.
I think you assume there, Senator, that the criminal doesn't have assets.
No, I'm not assuming that the criminal doesn't have access.
Because if he has access.
I just know that once the perpetrator, because I want to ask you another part of the bill where it requires reporting, because once the person is arrested, okay, once the person is arrested, he basically becomes controlled by the state in some regards, and his assets sometimes may be frozen or he may not be able to work. But this first part of the statute, this first part of Section 4, Article 1, specifically says that no state health insurance plan benefits can be used to reimburse any expenses as it relates to what happens with an abortion. So it leads to
I mean, this is the language. This is the language that has been in the state budget for a number of years.
Yeah, don't make it right. It's been something that's been litigated, and I think you've talked about that. I'm just asking because we talked, you and I, and other members of our subcommittee, about straightening the language in this to not only punish the perpetrators, but also to clarify the issue of what expenses from an abortion are we talking about. Are we talking about a 10-year-old girl that, because of incest, has to have an abortion? And are we saying that the state of South Carolina is not going to pay the cost for that abortion and is not going to give her mental health counseling for as long as she needs because it was in reference, because she had to have an abortion? To me, that doesn't seem like, if we're looking out for these kids, we got to look out for the kids.
Well, first of all, I don't accept that an incest victim has to have an abortion. I would hope that we could encourage some and we could love on them and we provide the necessary resources so that they would make a different decision.
Well, I'm dealing with the bill as it is, though.
Well, having said that, the provision that you're talking about deals only with the state health plan.
Senate will be in order.
The provision that you're talking about, I mean, I think they're a little bit conflated. What we're trying to put in this legislation, I think what the House is trying to do is to put an additional financial obligation on the criminal who causes this problem, who commits the act, right? And that this legislation would allow for abortions in the case of incest. It does not encourage them. I wouldn't encourage them, but it allows for them. But then it would allow for that criminal to be prosecuted, but also for the first time to impose some type of a financial obligation on that person. Now, but there's nothing in here that says that this minor girl is not going to be able to get mental health counseling otherwise. There's nothing in here that says that the state health plan wouldn't pay for counseling. What it says is, in fact, especially it wouldn't for that one because there's an exception in here for rape and incest anyway.
Senator, I would draw your attention to that section 4441A, and you don't have to look at it now, but just look at it and maybe you and I can talk about it. Now, how does this, let's go to the other part. For those incidences of rape and incest, how does this bill change what you and I went through before in the committee as it relates to the mandatory reporting of a person who is claiming to have been raped or have had an assault against her?
It is. I think it's the same thing.
It is the same exact thing.
I think this is generally, I mean, this is what, in that context, this is what the Senate passed in 2021 in the fetal heartbeat provision. This is what the Senate adopted, I think, with an amendment last year.
So is this the one where we would have tissue or DNA collection?
I don't remember that part.
I haven't looked at
it. It does require the physician, not the woman, not the girl. It requires the physician to report to law enforcement, and then there's got to be some material maintained so that law enforcement then can conduct the investigation.
Now let's go over another question that was brought up repeatedly in our committee meeting. Does it require the woman to provide the name of the perpetrator to her physician?
All this the only requirement is on the physician, and it requires the physician to report to law enforcement.
And does it provide any putative punishment to a physician who fails to report to law enforcement?
There is a penalty if the physician does not.
And what is that penalty? And where would I find it? I'm on page 7.
It's in section 830.
Okay. 830? Okay.
Yeah. It's A2, which talks about that language where the physician report.
And it says here, what does it say as it relates to failure to report? And report must be made no later than 24 hours after performing the abortion, correct?
That's right, within 24 hours.
And it allows the physician to make the report orally or in writing?
It does.
And it must include the name and contact number of the pregnant woman. Where does it say in that? I'm looking for it. I see the DNA sampling requirement like we had in the other bill. I still don't see on the A that you reference where it says what the penalty would be for a physician who fails to report. Now, I apologize if I know that was a big issue for us.
Now there's, and I may have to get some help, but I can find that. I saw that earlier, but I may have to look through here to find it.
I tried looking for it and I didn't find it.
Okay.
So
there is an affirmative obligation on the physician to report, and there is a consequence if the physician doesn't.
we don't know what it is.
I'll find it. I don't
Okay.
want to interrupt your train of thought with these questions.
Train of thought takes that. Quick question. Was there, I assume that you've gone over this with a lot of the sponsors of this bill because it's a lot different than what the Senate previously passed and sent across the aisle.
It's different.
Yes.
What the Senate passed was the fatal fetal heartbeat law
Right,
or bill.
right.
And this
And
is
the 6-week
different in that respect. Yeah.
I'm going to take the bait.
I wasn't trying to throw any out.
Does this body or does the House, in order to combat the issue that you've discussed earlier regarding folks coming across in the spike in abortions in South Carolina and folks coming from more restrictive states to South Carolina to have abortions, does this body or the body across the hallway have the ability to restrict out-of-state citizens from coming here to our clinics to have abortions if it so wanted to?
I don't think we have the ability to affect what someone out of state does as far as coming across the border. I think we absolutely have the ability to regulate what happens inside the border.
Okay.
And that's what this would do, right? I mean, they're coming over. I mean, and I think it's a pretty easy argument to make. But I mean, they're coming over because the laws here are weaker than they are in their home states. So we could strengthen our laws here, which would almost certainly deter that traffic from coming across the border.
And you very eloquently told us that we tried to do this last year and the year before, and it still didn't pass.
Well, I offered an amendment to do much of this last September, and I was up here talking about it for a while then, and it received 24 votes, but it didn't have 26 votes.
I got it. Now, the statute, going back to the question I asked about what would happen to a small town physician, you got the only physician in town. We don't have a lot of doctors in some of our rural towns, and if he's required to perform an abortion, he only has 24 hours, and no matter how busy his day was, he only has 24 hours to report. Now, if he does not report in that little small town, 4441-840A says that he could be found guilty and deemed a felon and would be fined $10,000.
That sounds right. That's what I
And
remember
he will
reading
lose his
earlier.
license.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, look,
And
Senator,
there's
we think
nothing
it's
in it-
important. We think it's important that the physician report, so that law enforcement can then begin whatever investigation they need to begin.
Let's go to law enforcement.
To pursue criminal charges against a rapist or someone who commits incest.
Yeah, but let's go to law enforcement. Law enforcement gets this information, and are you telling us that you're okay with this bill when it is silent on what law enforcement can do with the information once they receive this report? Are you comfortable that this bill totally and clearly outlines the parameters of what law enforcement can do as it relates to women and what they get, the information they get from these doctors? Are you comfortable with that?
I guess I'm not exactly clear on the specifics of your question, but
My
I'll say
specifics are the rape is reported.
Yeah.
The woman and the information goes to law enforcement. The doctor, when she tells the doctor, I was raped by somebody named Jimmy last night. We were at a date. I go to USC or whatever college, and I was raped. All I know is his name is Jimmy. That information goes to the sheriff from the doctor. Are you comfortable with the sheriff coming back to this girl and questioning her and likely charging her because she can't provide the identity of this person or will not provide the identity of this person? Are you comfortable with the silence of this document?
Well, first, I disagree with the premise of your question that, I mean, you indicated in your question that she would likely to be charged. I absolutely disagree with that.
I asked, are you comfortable with her either potentially being charged with not? Because this piece of legislation is silent, like we went over in the committee. It's silent on what happens once this information is dropped on the sheriff's department.
Whatever crime there is in South Carolina, and we got a bunch of them, but whatever crime there is no affirmative obligation of the crime victim to do that, right? This bill is no different than any other criminal law that we have in that respect.
You and I both know there are a lot of ways, even though this bill out of one side of its mouth says it's protecting children, out of the other side of the mouth of this bill, it's saying, I'm not going to protect the doctors and I'm not going to protect this woman that has been sexually assaulted. Because there's so many laws out there that some deputy could charge this woman with because he believes she is not telling the truth, like failing to cooperate with law enforcement, with telling a lie.
I mean, and I understand your opposition to the bill generally, but look, what the bill sets out is a statewide policy that we do not want abortions, but we will, under this legislation, allow for them in certain limited exceptions. If one of those exceptions, if the exception is for rape or incest, if a crime has been committed, right? If a crime has been committed, this says that the physician who performs the abortion pursuant to that exception must then report that criminal activity to law enforcement. And what law enforcement does with that information then is what law enforcement does with information as to any other crime.
I get it.
So they may very well speak to the crime victim. They may very well do what the sheriff in Charleston has said she'd do, and that is nothing.
Well, that's the problem. Because of the disparity throughout the state of South Carolina.
Well, look,
let me finish this one question.
We expect law enforcement people to carry out the law. We expect them to follow their oath.
That's why it is incumbent upon us, because of that disparity you just mentioned. You proved my case, because it's because of that disparity of law enforcement in 46 counties of sheriffs that are elected that it does not equally protect each woman or each child as you so-called want, because this bill should be specific on what law enforcement can and cannot do once they get the information.
It's the same that they do with any other crime.
Okay. The other question I have, and I'm going to try to wrap this up and sit down. You said that you understand why I am opposed to the bill.
No, I understand that you are.
You realize that I do not approve of abortions. I cringe when politicians make statements like this. And it bothered me, and I did not hear it until I was in one of our committee meetings where somehow I pulled the equine law and not the abortion law, but it made me cringe in the committee meeting. I'm not a pro-birther. I am a pro-lifer. I believe you should have your children, but I believe we should protect our children and our women and our men. It bothers me when we, as politicians, did you realize, and I want to make sure you don't approve of this, do you believe that women in the state of South Carolina use abortion as a method of birth control? Do you believe that of our women?
Senator, I'm happy to answer questions about the bill, but I don't really want to get into it.
Is that you don't believe, you don't?
I mean, and I appreciate the points that you're trying to make. I'm not going to engage in that.